Right. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us again today. This is the last of our Energy Geographies seminars for this spring semester. We're joined by Dr. Jenn Baka from Penn State University. Thanks again, Jen, for joining us today. Really excited to hear your talk. I just wanted to give a couple of announcements before we get started. So first of all, I wanted to just give a little bit of a kind of heads up on our next. Brilliant. Sorry, I've just I've got a manager admitting people at the same time as talking. Heads up on our next seminar series, which is going to begin again in the autumn term, so in September, October time. Date to be confirmed. We're going to be working with the RGS's Gender and Feminist Research Group, and the aim of the seminar series is for the process of a semester to explore the linkages between kind of gender, space, and energy. And we're currently in the process of finalising our speakers. If anybody has got any kind of suggestions of people that they think would be really great for inviting for this seminar series, or if anybody on the call here today feels that they'd be particularly well placed to talk on those themes, please do just get in touch, and we can look at considering those people for the program. But I think it's going to be a really exciting series, and the aim is to do kind of a coherent theme of talks across the semester. So keep your ears peeled for that. It looks set to be a great series. The only other thing that I want to just highlight now before we get started is that we are coming up to the RGS's annual conference, which is in the end of August, beginning of September. We've got a whole series of sessions that have been organised. The early bird rates for registration are now open, so I can say that we've got an absolutely fantastic slate of talks for the Energy Geographies group. We're looking at something about like 9 or 11 different sessions, so there really is a good showing on the kind of energy geography space if people are interested in going. Also at the RGS this year, although you don't need to be attending the RGS conference in order to be part of this, we're going to be having the annual general meeting for the Energy Geographies group, which is an opportunity for you to get involved with the running of our group and possibly to become one of the executive committee team. We will be announcing details of the positions that are available, or that are becoming available on our website in due course, probably over the next couple of weeks. So do kind of stay tuned to the website and to our mailing list for further details there. But it would be lovely to get more people involved. There are new positions coming up and some exciting projects that would be really keen to get people involved with. So without much further ado, I want to kind of pass on over to Jen. Jen's an assistant professor of geography at Penn State and conducts interdisciplinary research on energy policy with a particular focus on political ecology, industrial ecology, and resource geographies. Her work's really exciting. I'm sure most of you have kind of come across Jen's work in the past, and I'm really excited to hear about this particular project today. So thanks again, Jen, for joining us, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for everything you're doing, Peter, to, push the Energy Geographies research group forward. So I actually started my career at the LSE. I was an assistant professor of geography there for 3 years before moving back to Penn State. And I always tell everybody that the RGS was probably one of the best geography conferences I ever got to attend, because unlike the AAG, it's nice and it's much smaller. And I think that, I had better engagements with with actual geography scholarship there compared to the AAG, which has just become so sprawling and, 10,000 people. So, I'll just put in another plug for the RGS for everybody.
Fantastic. All the plugs we can get, the better.
Exactly. Yeah. And I try to send my grad students too when we can. And hopefully COVID restrictions will be lifted soon enough, then we'll be allowed to travel again. So,
sorry, Jen. You have literally just reminded me of, on the topic of students, of one other notification I need to give. If anybody here is a dissertation supervisor and has specifically a UK dissertation supervisor, I'm afraid, and has come across any particularly good undergraduate geography dissertations, or is marking, doesn't have to just be a supervisor, but is marking, please consider submitting those dissertations for our undergraduate dissertation awards this year. They have just been launched. There's £150 worth of book prizes up for grabs and the opportunity to showcase that dissertation research. We're looking for entries, so please do just get in touch. Sorry, Jen. Thank you.
No, excellent. No, I saw that announcement too, so that's really good to plug it as well. I don't miss marking in the UK, to be honest with you. Everything else I do miss. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to talk a lot about shale gas in Pennsylvania today. Okay, and we're going to take a deep dive into some of the state politics. So I am assuming no knowledge from the crowd, and if there's things that I mentioned that aren't very clear, please do feel free to pipe up in the Q&A. And I've set my alarm to stop at 11:50 a.m. I'm on the East Coast. I'm actually from Pennsylvania, and Penn State is right in the middle of Pennsylvania. So I want to give us plenty of time for discussion today. But without further ado here, so what I want to talk to you about today is this project that I have been working on in fits and starts for the last 5 years. And this is the emerging petrochemical corridor that is springing up in the southwestern part of Pennsylvania, just outside of Pittsburgh. And that hopefully helps to explain the title a little bit here. So cracking Appalachia. So this petrochemical plant is an ethane cracker. So it will take ethane, which is a byproduct of natural gas production, and basically transform it into a building block for plastics. And I'm using a political industrial ecology lens to analyze this emerging corridor and trying to understand how this corridor is reshaping nature society relationships, and most importantly, what are the environmental governance processes that are enabling and to a lesser extent constraining this development. Okay. So just a little bit of background as we start talking about Pennsylvania. Here is the current governor of Pennsylvania who will leave office next year. This is Democratic Governor Tom Wolf, and he has set the state on a course to transition the energy economy in the state to a lower carbon energy system. To the unfamiliar, Pennsylvania is a legacy oil and gas state. The first oil well in the US was drilled here in Western Pennsylvania. My family came to the US, at the early 1900s to be coal miners in the anthracite coal mines in northeastern Pennsylvania. And now we're in the middle of this shale gas boom. But Governor Wolf is trying to transition us away from, that historic legacy of a dirty fossil fuel state towards a cleaner energy state, or cleaner energy technology state. So what are some of the things he's done? So he's initiated a climate action plan. He's closed down the infamous 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, which, almost caused a nuclear disaster in 1979. And most significantly, he has joined the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a cap and trade program amongst 14 mid-Atlantic and Northeast states. And so he signed Pennsylvania up to join this cap and trade program via executive order. So that makes it a little bit contentious. And we're set to join Reggie in January of 2022, just before Wolf would leave office, like a year before he would leave leave office. There's a gubernatorial election slated for Pennsylvania next fall, in the fall of 2022. So a lot of action on the energy side happening here in Pennsylvania. But central to a lot of these initiatives is a continued expansion of hydraulic fracturing in the Marcellus shale bed. So I have here a map. Here is Pennsylvania, the outline here. It's the Keystone State. And here's the Marcellus shale. I'm just circling it here with my cursor. So this is the second most productive shale basin in the US, and it has helped transform the global energy economy. And I'm putting on my Mike Bradshaw hat here. So because of fracking in the US is now the leading producer of oil and gas in the world. And we've transitioned from a country that was a net importer of these products to a net exporter. And the Marcellus shale has been very central to this transformation. And it's central to these energy transition policies that Governor Wolf has enacted in recent years, because a lot of the transition is predicated on a doubling down and an expansion of natural gas production, which to the lay public is marketed as a bridge fuel and as a cleaner energy source than coal, which has been, one of the staples of the energy economy of Pennsylvania for quite a few decades. All right. And so here's a picture of this latest iteration of fracking. This is the Shell ethane cracker plant that I referenced in the title. This is a picture of the plant under construction. This is being built about 30 miles to the northwest of Pittsburgh. And what this is going to do is take, this ethane byproduct from hydraulically fractured natural gas in the Marcellus and transform it into plastics. All right, and just to give you a sense of where this is located, here's the map of Pennsylvania again. This Shell plant is located in Beaver County, which is just to the north of Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is. And it's in a township of just 550 people in Potter Township, which I have shown here in red. And just to put it in broader perspective here, here's the city of Pittsburgh, and here's the site of this ethane cracker plant. And the plant itself occupies about 1,000 acres, and it is scheduled to open early next year. All right. And so why is this such a big deal here in Pennsylvania? So I'm just going to pull some language from Governor Wolf's announcement back in 2016, when he announced that this plant would indeed be coming to Pennsylvania. All right, so he's committed to creating jobs in the energy industry through responsible, well-regulated extraction and long-term creative industrial growth. So putting on my economics hat, this is, Pennsylvania trying to exercise its comparative advantage because we have all of these natural resources under our feet. And just to dig into this a little bit more, a lot of the discourse that's circulating in the media is that this plant will create 6,000 temporary construction jobs and 600 permanent jobs when this plant is operational next year. Significantly here, to attract this plant to the state granted Shell the largest tax break in state history, which is estimated at $1.65 billion over a 25-year period. But simultaneously, Shell is saying that, it's going to be investing $6 to $10 billion in constructing this site, which amounts to the largest private investment in the state. So, it's revolutionary on many fronts here. And now Trump also picked this up, as part of his efforts to, bring back the fossil fuel economy and reach out to displaced coal miners. So he actually visited the plant back in August of 2019, and he likened the ethane, that's the, main feedstock for this plant, as the gold underneath our feet. And he just kept talking about how this is going to transform this region of Appalachia along the Ohio River. And of course, that's where a lot of the coal mining and steel manufacturing has historically been located in the US. So, he was talking directly to his base when he came for this visit. All right. And I like this, sounds very much like Trumpian language here, that we're going to manufacture plastics, ship them all over the world, and it's going to be stamped with made in the USA. And here's just a picture of the rally. And another important thing to flag here is that these are a lot of union workers that you see in the audience here. And as was reported in the media, workers were told that they either had to attend the rally that day or take, a day of leave, at their own expense. So, not surprisingly, the rafters were filled with people at this rally. All right, and this is just a historic map showing, where steel manufacturing was in the US, and you see a lot of these dots here. This is that same area where shale gas development is happening and where the petrochemical corridor is located. So, it's part of this larger boom bust cycle that often accompanies resource development. Okay. All right, so what have I been up to? So for the last 5 years, I've been going out trying to make sense of what this cracker plant means in terms of how it is, transforming environment society relationships and how it's governed. I've been making inroads with some stakeholder groups. I've been attending some industry conferences, which, they're expensive to attend, but if you guys would like an eye-opening experience, I would invite everyone to attend an industry conference at some point in their life. And then I've been doing a lot of document analysis, looking at the regulatory side of things, going through hundreds of pages of permits and public comments and public hearing transcripts to just understand how this project is evolving. Okay, and then I've also been, applying for grants on the side, trying to, get more additional funding to continue this fieldwork, so I can go out and spend, some longer periods of time and do some more ethnographic work with communities that are living in the midst of this transition. All right, but a key theme from my research so far is that this cracker plant is more than just the shell plant. It's part of a bigger puzzle. However, community groups and individual stakeholders really don't know how it all fits together. And just to give you an example of this, so the shell plant was permitted, but then there's all this accompanying infrastructure that's also being built in and around this area. And a lot of people are just concerned because they don't know, well, does this infrastructure support the shell plant, or is it something else related to oil and gas development? And they continuously describe to me, a sense of having whiplash. They just start wrapping their heads around one piece, and then something else is permitted. And so they can't make heads or tails of it. And so when I heard these types of comments from my interviewees and from reading the documents, that's what turned on my researcher's cap and, made me think that, a political industrial ecology lens would be really helpful to try to make sense of what this evolving corridor might look like. All right, so what I've been doing is, trying to answer that question: what is the cracker plant? How do all these different components fit together or not? What's the bigger puzzle, if you will? How does the plant as a system, when you go from, the hydraulic fracturing well pads to these plastic pellets, how does that actual system, interlink and transform livelihoods and environments within this region of Appalachia, which is along the Ohio River? How is this system governed and regulated or not? And then what do we see when we look at this plant and the system, or from a systems view, rather than a collection of individual components? And then something else to flag here is that, this plant, when it's operational, is going to make 1.5 million metric tons of plastic pellets per year. And we just have to acknowledge this growing global concern about the increased environmental and human health burden of plastics, because very little of it is recycled and a lot of it is ending up in the ocean. So I have here a picture from the June 2018 cover of National Geographic here in the US, when they're talking about this continent of plastic out in the ocean, which they estimate, or which researchers have estimated to be about 18 billion pounds of plastic waste. So I think this ethane cracker plant, we have to ask the question, to what extent might an expansion of plastics production in the shale gas region of Pennsylvania contribute to this global environmental burden of plastics? All right. And so I've been analyzing or addressing these objectives through a political industrial ecology framework. So what is this? So this is a nascent subfield of geography that tries to simultaneously analyze material and political processes mediating resource metabolism. So resource metabolisms, the way I'm understanding it here, is I'm integrating conceptions of metabolism from urban political ecology and industrial political ecology, as well as industrial ecology. So, I'm literally tracing the flows of energy and materials through this supply chain. So how do we get from hydraulically fractured natural gas to these ethylene pellets, these plastic inputs? What are the flows of energy, materials, and waste along that supply chain? But then also embed that supply chain within a broader historical, economic, and political context. Okay, so I'm just not mapping the resource flows as an industrial ecologist might. I'm drawing on urban political ecology and Matt Huber's industrial political ecology to try to make better sense of the political processes and environmental transformations that enable and occur along the supply chain. Okay. And so I'm hoping that by, mapping out this type of system and, looking at this project as more than just the shell plant, that'll equip us with some tools to be, help Governor Wolf, or hold him to his words that, we can, do resource extraction here in Pennsylvania in a more environmentally benign type of mechanism or type of way. Okay. So that's something we can come back to in the Q&A if you would like. All right, and then just a little bit more too. So, more broadly, how does this project fit within geography? So I'm hoping that this can advance materiality research on natural gas and natural gas liquids, because, a lot of us are energy geographers here, and, there's a lot of research done on oil economies and the materiality of oil, and the research on natural gas is not as well built out. And there is very little research on natural gas liquids, these byproducts of natural gas, such as ethane, that are being used to manufacture these plastics. So this is the start of, an energy geographic perspective on natural gas liquids and an expansion of, emerging research on natural gas. And I'm hoping too that, my critique of some of the urban political ecology research and industrial ecology research is that it's quite urban centric right now. And I would like to develop some tools that better show us how rural and urban systems are interconnected and transformed through the process of energy development. And then, I'm keenly interested in understanding policy processes and regulatory and governance processes. So I'm hoping that by integrating, the systems thinking and these metabolic approaches with environmental governance analysis, that'll give us some additional tools for, making good on some of the tenets of political ecology that we can design, more environmentally benign and just industrial systems. Okay. All right, so let's start getting into, some of the nitty gritty of this plant. So what is the cracker plant? All right, so just taking us back to some maps here. So this is the Marcellus region again, and there's a really important distinction in the types of products that are produced from the Marcellus shale. And that's this line here between dry gas and wet gas. And basically what happens in the dry gas region, when you frack in that area, all you're getting is methane. Whereas to the west of that line, this wet gas region, you're getting methane plus these natural gas liquids. And then through a process called fractionation, you can separate out these natural gas liquids from the methane and ostensibly create different markets for these products. Until this cracker plant comes online, or up until this point, a lot of the wet gas was just, or a lot of the natural gas liquids have been flared off from the methane streams, or what they call rejected into the natural gas supply chain. So, when I go to these industry conferences, a lot of the folks are talking about the gas coming from this wet gas region as burning hot, meaning that they were literally burning money by rejecting some of this natural gas liquid stream into the natural gas supplies chain. So there was a big concerted effort on the side of industry to try to, create new markets for these natural gas liquids so that they weren't literally burning money or losing profits in this production process. Okay. And then the end goal of this cracker plant is to create these ethylene pellets, which I have a picture of here on the right. So these are building blocks of plastics. All right, and then where do you find ethylene? The answer is everywhere. If you've ever seen that movie, The Graduate, with, I think it was Dustin Hoffman and his, potential father-in-law was saying that the future of the world is plastics. I feel that we're coming full circle, and that's what this plant is bringing us back to. I mean, you find it everywhere from carpets to, diapers to food packaging. A lot of the single-use plastics, they're ethylene, to tires. I'm sitting on a chair right now. I'm sure that the arm handles are made from ethylene products. So, it's everywhere. And I'm sure that we touch an ethylene derived product dozens of times throughout our daily course of life, even when we're in a home environment. All right. And now the cracker plant itself here. So, I showed you the picture where it is, just to the northwest of Pennsylvania. These are some of the infrastructures that are contained at the site itself. This is what they had to do in order to, clear this 1,000 acres of land to make it suitable for the site. And it's scheduled to open in 2022, early next year. The thing I just want to flag here that a lot of folks discuss in the area is that there used to be a zinc smelter that occupied this site, and they didn't really have good neighborly relations with the community. So Shell has done a lot to gain its social license to operate. So when I've gone and talked to folks in the community, they're grateful for Shell, and they're glad that this zinc smelter has gone away, because they didn't think that the zinc smelter, that the owners and operators of that they were good neighbors. Interestingly as well, they don't think that the governor, the former governor, so the governor before Wolf, Tom Corbett, he was the one who really started the discussions with Shell to bring this plant to Pennsylvania. And the local community members, including the local government officials, they don't have a very high opinion of former Governor Corbett. They don't have a good opinion of the zinc smelter, but they are very happy with the way Shell has treated them. All right, just to give you a little bit of history of fracking in Pennsylvania, between 2005 and 2012, over 12,000 fracking wells have been drilled in Pennsylvania. This is a massive industrial expansion. And what you see here, each dot represents one fracking well, and then here is the timeline for when those wells were drilled. So the early drilling largely happened up in that dry gas region of the northeastern part of the state, but a lot of the activity right now is down in the southwestern wet gas region of the state, and also extending into Ohio and West Virginia. Okay. And then what happens with cracking? So, you can, this is that process for separating out these natural gas liquids from the methane supply streams. And based on some industry reports and some government analysis from the Energy Information Agency, that's part of the Department of Energy here in the US, if this corridor is built out as some analysts are anticipating, they believe that there'll be a 27-fold increase in fractionation capacity in the US as a result of this build out here in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. All right, but it's not enough to just do the fracking. You have to start getting these products to markets. So we're seeing a huge infrastructure expansion here in Pennsylvania as well. So first we have natural gas pipelines that are being built out. Each of these red lines represents a pipeline. Here in the black circle, that's just this area of the petrochemical plant. The thing to flag here is that there's 9 major natural gas pipelines under construction in this Marcellus region. Some more insights from these industry conferences I've attended. They were saying that, in that early boom phase, like let's say 2008 to 2012, that a lot of the natural gas was stranded in the field because we didn't have good enough pipeline capacity in Pennsylvania to get the gas from these rural well pads to market. So there's, a big expansion going on to try to correct that. But also, natural gas is a gas. Gas likes to escape. It doesn't want to be contained and put through pipelines. So what you also have to do is build compressor stations along the way. And so each of these red dots is a compressor station that tries to, keep the gas at, a consistent pressure to move it from these well pads to markets. And it's important to discuss the compressor stations because there's a lot of fugitive emissions from methane or from the natural gas infrastructure. And fugitive emissions from the compressor stations have been highlighted by researchers as some of the main sources for methane leaks in the infrastructure in the US. And for folks who might be following US politics, the Biden administration is trying to implement a rule to reduce fugitive methane leaks from natural gas production. So this is something that's, a hot button item in environmental politics here in the US right now. But also you need a separate pipeline infrastructure to get the ethane to market. So ethane is more volatile than methane and it actually has to be liquefied. So you can't send it through the natural gas pipelines. So here is a picture of the various ethane pipelines that are also being constructed throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic to get this ethane from this region of the Marcellus to market. And just a couple of things to flag here. So this is the area of the Shell plant, but you see that there's ethane pipelines being built over towards Philadelphia, which is the main city in the southeast of Pennsylvania. This is significant because, some of this ethane is being put on ships and transported over to Scotland, where there's an existing petrochemical corridor. Or these pipelines are interconnecting up to Ontario, Canada, where there's an existing petrochemical corridor. And additionally, there are some tie-ins being built to ethane pipelines that would transport this product down to the US Gulf Coast, which is also a very big petrochemical corridor globally. So this brings us back to that geographic perspective that, this build out that we're seeing here in Pennsylvania, is really a big attempt to make a more globally interconnected market for natural gas liquids, because unlike oil, natural gas and these natural gas liquids have focused or have operated more on a regional scale, in large part because of the cost of getting these natural gas and natural gas liquids to market. But now we see this big market integration happening, and it's centered here in the Marcellus. Okay. And then just one of these ethane pipelines to flag to keep on your radar screen. So Shell is actually building its own pipeline, this Falcon ethane pipeline, and that's going to allow Shell to, transport ethane from Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania to the Shell plant itself. And so this is a massive investment that's also part of Shell's investment in this region. And then another part of this market build out is the Appalachian storage hub. So gas and natural gas liquids, the production varies seasonally. So the wells are more productive in the summertime when demand for gas and natural gas liquids is lower. So you need a place to store these products. And what they're doing is trying to build a storage hub, likely down in West Virginia. This is a map of West Virginia, in abandoned salt mines. So they want to park the ethane underground so that you can produce it in the summer when the wells are most productive, but then park it until market prices are just right. Okay. And I just learned yesterday, because I checked in with one of my stakeholders, that they're trying to expand the scope of this storage hub so that it wouldn't just be storing ethane, it would also be storing hydrogen, because there's now talk of trying to include hydrogen in a green energy economy. So I keep laughing to myself in some ways, because I've been studying energy geography for the last 15 years, but living it my whole life since I'm from the Appalachian coal fields. But I think it's quite ironic that 15 years ago, and I was doing my master's out at Berkeley, that was when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, and he was betting the California energy economy on hydrogen. It didn't really take off, but now those conversations are coming back into dialogue. So I'm going to tell everybody on the call here today some of the advice I received from a senior energy scholar when I first started my career, that if you stay in the energy business long enough, you're going to hear the same stories over and over again. So, I'm starting to hear the hydrogen story for a second time. So I guess I'm transitioning from, perhaps a junior to a more middle-aged scholar, if you will. Okay. And then lastly, the shale plant is just the first of what could potentially be 4 or 5 ethane crackers to come here. So according to an industry report conducted by Dan Jurgens' group, IHS Markit, there's enough ethane potential, or enough ethane reserve in this wet gas region of the Marcellus to support up to 5 ethane crackers, similar in size and capacity to the Shell chemical plant. And if we build out and reach 5 crackers in this Ohio River Valley, that would be about a 6.25 million metric ton production increase in ethylene per year. And that would represent about a 25% increase in the overall capacity for ethylene production in the US. So we're talking about a really huge market making endeavor. And I'd be interested to poll the audience who has actually heard of this build out before attending this talk today, because it's something I think that is sliding under the radar in the state and national discussions of energy here in the US. But it's going to be another transformation if industry makes good on these promises. All right, and so here's a map that I will credit one of our grad students in my department, Harrison Cole, who is a brilliant cartographer. He made this for me, just trying to piece all these different components of the metabolism together. So you have your fracking well pads, these little tiny dots, you have your pipelines, you have the locations of the potential cracker plants, the storage hub, the wet gas region of the Marcellus, and the various ethane pipelines going up to Canada and down to the US Gulf Coast. So this is the system that we're looking at, okay? And this is what I've been trying to make sense of the last 5 years. All right, and so what explains it? Let's start getting into some of the theory here. So I think, this core geographic concept of the spatial fix really helps us to understand why this plant is coming to the area now and why it's coming to this particular area. So the spatial fix is Harvey's term for the tendency of capitalism to temporarily solve its periodic crises by establishing new markets, new resources, and new sites of production in other places. So, I had mentioned how, we had that rapid build out of fracking well pads in a very short time period here in Pennsylvania. And you see what happened to the prices of natural gas here in this graph. So we go from the highs of, just over $8 per MMBTU back in the 2007-2008 period. We have 12,000 wells come in, and then the price of gas starts to plummet down in the $3 range. Okay, so the spatial fix helps us to understand how this cracker plant, which is based on byproducts from natural gas, can in theory, help to increase the price of natural gas and natural gas liquids, because you're creating a new demand and a new market for these products. All right, and here's just how the prices of natural gas and ethane have followed each other. So here's the ethane prices. The ethane prices are in the blue, and the natural gas or methane prices are in the brown. And you see that they've pretty much been tracking each other until we get to, the 2018 period, which is, after the time when the Shell cracker plant was permitted and announced. So you see that we're starting to get a separation in these markets or in these prices, meaning that, we're at the start of new markets, and, perhaps the prices or the potential profit-making activities for these oil and gas companies are on the uptick. All right, so why this particular area of the Marcellus? Well, here's the discourse that this wet gas region of the Marcellus is within 700 miles of over 70% of US and Canadian ethylene demand. We saw the job production potential from Governor Wolf's announcement. And, the region has been in decline for about 4 decades after the closures of steel and industrial manufacturing. And in fact, Shell came to town looking for a site to build this plant, and it was trying to pit Ohio, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania against each other to see who would give Shell the best deal. And so, as the media said, Pennsylvania won the first round of the so-called cracker sweepstakes by offering Shell this tremendous tax break. But, there's other investments under discussion in Ohio and West Virginia. So PTT Global, which is one of the largest petrochemical companies in Thailand, they have been in talks with Ohio to try to build a cracker plant in Ohio, just across the river from the Shell plant. And then within West Virginia, there's been various multinational companies in talks to build a plant there. And I've also learned recently that ExxonMobil is now exploring opportunities up in the Marcellus region. So lots of global interest coming to town. All right, but let's think of our theory again for a few minutes here. So why Pennsylvania in northern Appalachia? So I think that Malm's fossil capital hypothesis gives us some insights here. So globally mobile capital will locate in areas that have economic growth that is dependent on fossil fuels, the abundance of cheap and disciplined labor. So, you have a lot of displaced steel miners and union industrialists who live in this area who are eager for work. And you saw them packing the rafters at the Trump rally, and relatively good infrastructure maintained by the state. So, this Pittsburgh area, it's really quite fascinating. And, they've been trying to fashion themselves into a tech hub for quite some time. So, the city and the state have invested a lot in the airport infrastructure, the transportation networks, and a lot of it is underutilized. So, it's sitting there primed and ready for, a big industry like Shell to come to town and really make better use of it. So I think that the fossil capital hypothesis gives us some tools to think about, why this development is coming to the region. However, I think with a lot of the Marxist political economy critiques, we can do a little bit better job of understanding the role of the state in mediating these processes. So I'm just checking on time. I have like 1 minute left. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time in my remaining minutes just speaking about some of the politics of, how this plant has come to Pennsylvania. And I'm going to rush here a little bit more. So we have Wolf's announcement, but something else that's really important right now is the oversized significance of the West Virginia Senate delegation within politics in the US right now. So here's a picture of the 2 senators from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, who's a Democrat, and Shelley Moore Caputo, who's a Republican. both of them are very big supporters of fracking and natural gas. And, I've done research on congressional testimonies where Manchin is on record back to 2008 saying that he is a big supporter of crackers and that they need to bring them to West Virginia to, revitalize the West Virginia economy. And so the West Virginia state legislature, they have been passing bills for quite a few years now, trying to give tax breaks similar to what Pennsylvania has offered Shell to attract other cracker plants to West Virginia. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of these slides at the back end here to allow time for questions, but things I want to flag here for you. So working with some law students, I just went through and asked, okay, so we have this system of the cracker plant. What are the different environmental regulations at the state, federal, and local levels that govern this ecosystem, if you will? Because I really want to understand what are the regulatory gaps and overlaps that allow something like this project to come to Pennsylvania. And so what they did for me, this is a map of the federal regulations. So they took each of those components of the cracker plant, and we found that there's 12 different federal laws and 17 different regulators that have some role in governing this cracker plant. And at the state level, there's 12 laws and 8 different regulators involved, and they each regulate an individual component. There's no thinking of this plant as a system. And this has been a bone of contention amongst the stakeholders I've interviewed, because they think that, if you look at this plant as a system and think of the cumulative emissions from each of the individual wells to the ethylene production, that the system would be subject to a higher level of environmental scrutiny than is currently allowed, because we currently regulate each component in a piecemeal fashion. Okay, so this is something significant that has come out of my preliminary research to date. And I'm sorry, that's my cat talking. It's lunchtime for him. So there's I guess a desire, if you will, on behalf of environmental NGOs and some community members to look at this thing as a system, as an integrated whole, rather than this collection of piecemeal components. All right, and so I think this regulatory analysis really tries to flesh that out a little bit. All right, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on these last slides, but there's also a lot of governance processes that happen at the local level, and in particular, 3 local government officials within that Potter Township area, they had the power to, give Shell a conditional use permit, so giving them permission to construct this plant within their community. So those 3 commissioners who ultimately did give Shell this conditional use permit, they have the power, in a sense, to reshape the environment for a larger swath of Southwest Pennsylvania, because the emissions from this Shell cracker plant don't just stop at the fence site of the plant. They don't just stop in Potter Township. There's a concern that, it's going to change the environmental profile for much of the greater Pittsburgh region. And those 3 local government officials had perhaps outsized power to reshape those dynamics. So that is another concern that has come out of my preliminary interviews to date. Okay, so I'm just going to go through. I just want to get to the final slide. If folks are really interested in the nitty-gritty of air permitting, I'm really happy to talk about that, but I don't want to delay us too much here. Okay, and I just want to get to a conclusion slide here. So what do we see when we look at this corridor from a political industrial ecology perspective? So first of all, I think it tells us that scale matters, because the view of the cracker plant looks different depending on your scale or perspective. If you look at it as just a plant versus this integrated system, we see different dynamics or different dimensions of these processes. And I think this comes out in starkest relief when we look at the regulation of the plant. Okay, and then I've said this before, but it's worth reemphasizing that this system represents a major effort to establish a more globally integrated market for natural gas and ethane. And then it also calls into question how many of the benefits will accrue locally, because the pipeline infrastructure development, these pipelines are up and running. So the ethane is already being pumped out of southwestern Pennsylvania, if you will, while the Shell plant isn't scheduled to come online until next year. All right. And then it reveals the high degree of regulatory fragmentation at the federal, state, and local levels. The system is regulated on an individual component rather than systems basis. And then, just again, recalling this question from a lot of my interviewees, how does this current regulatory system take into account the cumulative impacts and risks of the system, if at all? And then, folks will often talk to me and say, it's not worth my time to go to a community meeting or to submit a comment to a rulemaking process, because what does my individual perspective matter? But I think that, mapping out this system, perhaps provides some more tools to enable and equip local community members to get involved in the regulatory process, because it shows a better perspective on the multitude of environments and livelihoods that are intertwined through this system. All right. And then, if I were going to make one suggestion or policy recommendation, if you will, I would say that, can we rethink our environmental governance strategies here in the US and at the state level, so that we think of these developments more as an integrated system rather than a collection of individual components. And I think here that there's a lot that energy governance can learn from water governance, because, we regulate water, on a watershed perspective in many places here in the US, which, is a rescaling of environmental governance. So can we take some of those tools from water governance and apply it to energy, so that we can capture some of these more cumulative systemic risks that our current regulatory system here in the US really don't capture. All right, so with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I look forward to your questions. I'm happy to share the slide deck. Things will be recorded today, and you can always reach out to me at my email address here. I just want to thank the various research assistants who have helped me over these years, and of course, some of the funding that I've received so far. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your discussion.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was absolutely fantastic. And I think I echo a lot of the comments here. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. And I could definitely nerd out with you about natural gas for hours. But I'm going to probably hand over to Imogen to field the questions, if that's okay, because I do have to run in just a moment in order to be prodded with needles. We have got some questions in the chat, yeah, I've loads of questions as well, Jen, but I can direct them to you over email, I think. But yeah, Imogen, if you're happy fielding, that would be fantastic. And thanks again, Jen.
Excellent, and thank you, and good luck, Peter.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, that was really great. My background, my PhD, also shale gas, and I used to work at the English environmental regulator regulating shale gas. So it was kind of many familiar overlaps. Yes. I think what I'll do, if people are okay with this, is that if people are still in the meeting, I'll call upon them to unmute and ask their questions themselves. And if people have had to go, then I will kind of ask the questions. So the first question we've got in the chat is from Meg Egler. Meg, are you here? And would you like to ask your question? If not, then I'll read it out, which it asks about the crowd at the Trump rally was filled with union workers.
Yeah, she said she's here, but you can ask it. Okay.
Okay, fine. Sorry, I've missed that. Can you say more about the power dynamics before unions and workers in the area, and relatedly, what narratives are being used to legitimize these products to workers? Have you come across the use of waste as a positive environmental narrative?
Yes. So most of the union workers are just saying that, we need jobs. So, I mean, they're happy that, that they're happy to entertain union jobs in this corridor. And, they're happy to support Republican or Democratic administrations, because traditionally the unions have been Democratic in Pennsylvania, but now we're seeing this shift that they're just happy that there are industrial opportunities that, you know, would give the union a lifeline, if you will.
The next question is from me, so I will skip that in order to give other people the chance to speak. From Ben Cross. Ben, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, I'll go ahead and ask it. Probably, you know, what my first question was about, you know, the cheapest way to actually make hydrogen is through steam methane reforming. And actually be, you know, of course, people consider that blue hydrogen, and to make it more green is the carbon capture and sequestration. And my question really is, have you looked into what the impact would be and the additional pipelines that would be required as well to do the carbon capture, even if you're going to utilize the carbon, store it, or sequester?
Yeah, that is a good question, Ben, and thank you, because, you know, I literally just learned about this green hydrogen discussion yesterday, so I've yet to really look into this. So you're actually informing more, or you're telling me more of what I need to look into. But I was on a panel last week because we had this Energy Days conference here at Penn State. I'm not sure if that's something you attended, but there were some panels on carbon capture and sequestration. And from what I understand, in Pennsylvania, CCS is going to be more tree planting rather than trying to sequester it, because of the regulatory structure that you know, I guess that you can put it in the underground injection wells, but we don't have many of them permitted here in Pennsylvania. So this is something that we're going to toss your way again in Ohio. So be on the lookout, because we're doing that also. Like, just another comparison with shale gas here. So a lot of the produced water that comes back from fracking operations, we truck it over to Ohio to inject it in wells, because we don't allow that practice here in Pennsylvania.
Obviously putting it in wells is, of course, it really needs to be reutilized, is what the carbon needs to be done, made into plastics, which sort of leads into my second question, really, because I'm really focused on integrated energy systems. And if you have an integrated system, and in fact, I agree totally, this should be looked at total integration from beginning to end, life cycle. We need to do life cycle analysis from beginning to end. And then you can actually truly see what, not both for economics, but also for environmental impact. So you'd have to do a life cycle analysis for both of those. But anyway, my question should be focused on circular economy concepts like closed loop manufacturing, which to me should include where we actually recycle plastics on an industrial scale. They were created on an industrial scale, and then industry who help produce these needs to make sure they get recycled, and not just leave it up to the local community to do these nice feel-good recycling programs.
Yeah, and I would advocate for that too. And I think that Matt Huber's work on industrial political ecology is, you know, trying to get at that to an extent. So what the main argument from Matt's work is that, you know, when it comes to environmental stewardship, there's too much pressure put on the backs of individual consumers, where it's the industrial sector that is, you know, making this stuff, and they don't bear enough of the responsibility for reducing the environmental impacts and the environmental burdens.
Yes, they really need to be working together, get industry moving forward on how it actually recycles the material. Of course, it's not industry who throws it into the ocean or gets it into the ocean either.
No,
I mean, it's got to be a total mindset, and you don't see that in some countries. You automatically see people have a mindset of more how things are cleaner and put away, and versus in some places now in the United States, we've gotten a little more trashy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
So the next question's from Bryant Jones. Bryant, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. Jennifer, I've been learning so much today with your talk, so thank you so much. And you mentioned that Louisiana was one of the other major petrochemical plastic manufacturing states in the United States. And I know that there's Cancer Alley is now sort of a common name for a set of communities. One of them is St. James Parish. And I'm from the western part of the United States, so I don't know Louisiana or Pennsylvania that well, but I know that I've heard that the St. James Parish is predominantly a Black community, and I don't know, Western Pennsylvania, I assume, is mostly rural white. And so I'm curious if you've had seen any trends that are similar or how they might differ between this rural white and rural Black population that are both dealing with petrochemical manufacturing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That is another big research objective of mine right now too. So I also sit on the Environmental Justice Advisory Board for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. So that's our main state regulator. And we're currently trying to reassess how we define an environmental justice community here in Pennsylvania, because you're absolutely right, Bryant, that this area of Pennsylvania is rural and white, where Cancer Alley, this corridor of, I think it's 90 miles between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, where there's a lot of petrochemical manufacturing, is predominantly Black, and they have experienced tremendous rates of, unique cancers, environmental or public health effects, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a concern that we're going to be bringing Cancer Alley to this area of Appalachia. But right now, our environmental justice toolkit doesn't allow us to do much from the environmental regulatory perspective, because these areas aren't formally classed as environmental justice communities. Because in Pennsylvania, we define an environmental justice community as a community that is, 30% or 30% minority, or at least 30% minority, and or 20% of the population at or below the federal poverty line. And the thing that is interesting is if you get a job in the oil and gas industry, so like a lot of these rural communities, you can come out of out of high school and make more than, I will ever make as a professor. And so then there goes the income threshold, and it's rural Pennsylvania, and it is not the most welcoming place, unfortunately, for minority communities. So therefore it escapes the gaze. So this is something that I have been trying to advocate for in my position on this environmental justice board, that can we broaden our conceptualization so that we can be looking more at the public health dynamics of these communities and factor that into our classification of environmental justice communities, so that we could, do more interventions in these communities that are, right in the crosshairs of shale gas development. Because just a little anecdote. So a county to the south, Washington County, a county to the south of where this petrochemical corridor is, they're experiencing very unique rates of a rare cancer called Ewing sarcoma, which is a bone cancer. And it's devastating, and children tend to experience this cancer. Of the 200 cases that have been identified in the US, I think 25 of them are located in one particular high school district in Washington County, Pennsylvania. And it's also where the first shale gas well was drilled in Pennsylvania. And so there's a lot of research going on right now to try to understand if shale gas development could be linked to Ewing sarcoma in some way. But folks, anybody who's looked a little bit at, the public health dynamics here in the US. It is exceptionally hard to, draw causal linkages because you don't really have good baseline data, but, you don't have 40% of a rare cancer occurring in one particular high school district just by chance, So I think that's, you pulled a string there for me, Brian. I can speak about this for quite some time, but there's a tension within the environmental justice community too about, if we try to broaden our focus of environmental justice to also include these rural white communities, are we taking emphasis away from, poor urban and minority communities that, have certainly bore the brunt over decades.
Yeah, well, that's very intriguing. Thanks, Jennifer. And very complex American issue here.
Yeah, exactly. Sadly.
That was fascinating. Thank you. Sam Kamalt, are you here to ask your question? Great.
Yeah, I'm fascinated because I know quite a lot about the Marcellus. Basically, I feel in your presentation, and actually I want to say it was a great presentation. Thank you very much. I learned a lot. There's a lot of enthusiasm because this is, a new you know, a sort of a greenfield development and has economic progress and all that sort of thing. But I wonder a little bit about the long-term impacts. You know, when will this shell plant become like the zinc facility that it's replacing? Can the mix of ethane and methane and so on in the wet gas region, which is what you're dependent on, the Northeast Susquehanna County, Bradford County stuff is irrelevant really for this. You know, is that mix perhaps limiting with respect to other components of the feedstock stream? And so I'm just thinking about the total life cycle of all of this.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And I'll you know, go back to some of the stuff that Ben was saying, like if we can use more of an industrial ecology lens and, you know, be thinking through the whole life cycle, because, you know, I've asked the Shell folks this, you know, how long do you think this plant will operate? And they're like, and then they try to give me an answer like, oh, I'm just the environmental compliance officer, I can't answer that. So I don't have a good sense of that. But, you know, putting on my industrial ecology hat and also, you know, thinking of EU regulations, you know, there's like producer responsibility laws on the books in the EU. So can we try to inject more of that type of regulatory perspective here in the US that would, you know, put Shell more on the hook? And then also, you know, another challenge that we're facing here in Pennsylvania is, so what you would typically do in permitting an industrial project like this, there should be some sort of bonding or reclamation components of getting that permit. And it's a pittance. So basically, like these well operators, they plop down a few $100 that pays into a fee to, or that pays into a pot of money that can be used to restore land after fracking stops or after the petrochemical manufacturing stops. And it is not enough to, you know, reclaim the land to its former state. I believe states out west in the US do a better job with their reclamations and bonding fees, but here in Pennsylvania, we are suffering this because of fugitive methane emissions that, you know, the DEP estimates that it costs, you know, from, you know, $10,000 to $50,000 per well to plug an abandoned well, but yet they've only gotten a few $100 in bonding fees. And so I don't know that Shell had to pay anything, to be honest with you, for reclamation as part of its permitting process. A discourse that comes up is that, oh, they paid the money out of their pocket to, you know, clean up that zinc smelter. So, you know, the local government officials were really happy with that. They said, oh, we didn't have a brownfield, you know, coming down the pike. Shell took care of it, but they're not thinking of the potential brownfield that the Shell plant might become. So, you know, like, thank you for bringing up this question, because it's allowing me to think through all these linkages here. It's another gap in the regulatory system.
I'll send you a couple of emails because I think we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sam. And we have one final question from Emmanuel on an epistemological question. So, if Emmanuel, if you'd like to ask that.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for the excellent presentation. I've learned so much. And I have, yes, so more of an epistemological question related to the work you led about law and regulations. I was especially interested in the figure, the representation that you showed. And I was just wondering if you ever came across special challenges or difficulties with regards to including law in energy critical research, and if there is any pathways to dig that deeper as an insightful place to follow research. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think that there are still linkages to be made with you know, legal geography. So I'm thinking, what is her name? Amelia Candor, or I'm sorry, I'm not remembering her name correctly, but she did her PhD at Clark with James McCarthy, and now she's at Portland State University, or Aaliyah Candor. So she is, I think, one of the good thought leaders in legal geographies right now. And then James McCarthy, he's done some really good work. Thank you, Cantor. Thank you, Bethany. And then James McCarthy, he's written some papers on, some of the legal geographies of shale gas development here in the Marcellus. So I think those would be good places to start. And, I think this is like one of my little feeble attempts here to try to better integrate these two. But, it kind of goes like, thinking of those circle diagrams that I presented there, it's just representative of how we practice environmental governance here in the US. So, President Nixon funded established the EPA and then immediately started to defund it. And so it's a highly siloed organization compared to what I understand the environmental regulator is in the UK and in other countries around the world. So, you have your water division, you have your air division, and, they keep fighting for each other, fighting amongst each other for a sliver of an ever dwindling budget that's allocated by a Congress. And, so there's not a lot of talk here in the US about, how energy and water system, or energy, food and water systems interact. Everything is regulated, in a very siloed approach. And I think we see that in those circle diagrams.
Very interesting. Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. As a final reflection, there was a lot of talk in England about whether we should have a standalone shale gas regulator. And I think it was in the end it was decided against, because what you got with the sector specificity, you lost with the fact that your environmental regulator normally was place-based. So it would talk to your other developments, the groundwater, surface water, emissions to air, because as you say, the cumulative effects on a place are really important. So anyway, sorry, that was my slightly self-indulgent reflection there.
Yeah,
but
no.
Thank you, Jen, for a really fascinating talk. Thank you, everyone, for attending. You have Jen's email details there, and we will be circulating a recording of the presentation. So unless anyone has any final comments and thoughts, no? Then I wish you all a great weekend. Thank you.
Yes. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you again.